3 days. Dominic Reeves had exactly 3 days before a complete stranger would decide whether he deserved to keep his daughter. 3 days before the state could rip Rosie from his arms and hand her over to a woman who had already abandoned her once. 3 days to somehow prove that love mattered more than the zeros in a bank account. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, he just wanted to get home. 14 hours. That's how long he'd been working. Fixing cars from dawn until late afternoon, grease permanently embedded in the lines of his hands. Then serving coffee to people who looked right through him, who never noticed the exhaustion carved into his face, who never wondered why a 34-year-old man worked himself to the bone day after day. He did it for Rosie. Every early morning, every double shift, every night he came home so tired he could barely stand. She was worth all of it. The storm had rolled in fast, the way summer storms do in this part of the country. One moment the sky was gray and threatening. The next rain hammered his windshield like bullets, lightning cracking the darkness wide open. His wipers couldn't keep up. The road ahead blurred into streaks of black and silver. Dominic gripped the steering wheel tighter, leaning forward as if those few inches would help him see better. His eyes burned. His shoulders ached. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest. Just get home. See Rosie. Hold her. Remember why you're doing this. The custody hearing loomed over everything, a shadow he couldn't escape. Miranda's lawyers had painted him as financially unstable, overworked, incapable of providing a proper home. They'd made his love sound like a liability. They'd made his sacrifice sound like neglect. And maybe the worst part was how close they'd come to making him believe it. Then he saw them. Two figures standing in the rain beside a car that cost more than he'd make in 5 years. A Mercedes, sleek and black, its hazard lights blinking uselessly against the storm. Two young women, maybe 19 or 20, waving frantically at passing cars. No one stopped. Dominic watched 3 cars pass them without slowing down. He understood why. The world had become a place where stopping for strangers felt dangerous, where minding your own business was the safer choice. He had enough problems of his own. His foot pressed the gas pedal, ready to drive past like everyone else. But something in their faces caught him, that helpless, desperate look, the way they huddled together against the rain, mascara running down their cheeks in dark streaks, the fear in their eyes. It reminded him of Rosie. It reminded him of what it felt like to be abandoned when you needed someone most. Dominic pulled over. His tires splashed through puddles as he came to a stop behind the luxury sedan. For a moment he sat there, engine running, watching the 2 figures through his rain-blurred windshield. What are you doing? You don't have time for this. But he was already unbuckling his seatbelt. The rain hit him like a wall of cold water the moment he stepped out. Within seconds, his work shirt was soaked through, clinging to his skin. He didn't care. He walked toward the 2 young women who turned to face him, with identical expressions of surprise and relief. Twins. They were twins. Up close, he could see the resemblance clearly. Same dark hair plastered to their faces, same high cheekbones, same designer clothes now ruined by the storm. They looked like they'd never experienced a moment of hardship in their lives, but right now they looked terrified. Car trouble, Dominic called over the thunder. The one on the left nodded, shivering violently. It just died. We've been here for almost an hour. Our phones are dead and nobody stopped. Until you, the other one added. Her voice was small, fragile with gratitude. Dominic glanced at the Mercedes. Even in the darkness, he could tell it was immaculate. The kind of vehicle he only saw when wealthy clients brought them into the garage, the kind he serviced but would never own. Mind if I take a look? Please. They spoke in unison the way twins sometimes do. He walked around to the hood, rain pouring down his face as he examined the engine. It didn't take long to spot the problem. Corroded battery terminals, a loose connection. Simple fix under normal circumstances, but not something they could handle out here in the middle of a storm. Your battery's shot, he said, closing the hood. You're not going anywhere tonight. Not without a jump or a tow. The twins exchanged worried glances. We can call our father, one of them said, but her voice lacked conviction. He's probably busy, though. He's always busy. Something in the way she said it made Dominic pause. He recognized that tone. Disappointment wrapped in acceptance. The sound of someone who had stopped expecting to be a priority a long time ago. Look, he said, I can give you a ride. There's a hotel about 15 minutes from here. You can call a tow in the morning. You'd do that? The girl on the right asked. Genuine surprise flickered in her eyes, as if kindness from a stranger was something foreign and unexpected. Dominic shrugged, rain streaming down his face. Can't leave you out here. They grabbed their bags from the Mercedes and climbed into his beat-up Honda. The contrast was almost comical. Designer luggage in a car held together by determination and prayer. Leather bags that probably cost more than his monthly rent now pressed against fabric worn thin by years of use. Neither of them complained. They just looked relieved. I'm Gemma, the one in the passenger seat said as Dominic pulled back onto the highway. This is my sister Vivian. Dominic! He focused on the road, both hands gripping the wheel. The wipers still couldn't keep up with the rain. Thank you for stopping, Vivian said from the back seat. Really, most people they see us and they keep going. People are scared these days, Dominic replied. Can't blame them. But you stopped, Gemma pointed out. He was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer. The truth was, he'd almost kept driving. Almost let someone else's problem stay someone else's problem. I have a daughter, he finally said. She's 6. If she was ever stranded somewhere, scared in the rain, I'd hope someone would stop for her. The car fell silent except for the drumming of rain on the roof and the rhythmic sweep of windshield wipers fighting a losing battle. What's her name? Vivian asked softly. Rosie. That's beautiful. Gemma turned slightly in her seat to look at him. Do you get to see her often? The question hit harder than she could have known. Dominic's jaw tightened. His grip on the steering wheel turned his knuckles white. Every chance I get, he said, which might not be for much longer. He hadn't meant to say that. The words just slipped out, escaping through a crack in the wall he'd built around his fears. The weight he'd been carrying for months finally finding a way to surface. What do you mean? Vivian asked. Dominic stared straight ahead at the rain-blurred road. Her mother and I are divorced. She's trying to take full custody. Says I'm not fit to be a father because I work too much, don't make enough money. He paused. We go to court in 3 days. That's horrible, Gemma whispered. It is what it is. Though his voice betrayed him, cracking slightly on the last word. I'm doing everything I can. 2 jobs, saving every penny, showing up to every school event. He shook his head. But sometimes it feels like it's not enough. Like the world's already decided I'm not good enough. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Then Vivian leaned forward between the seats. Our father's like that, always working. We barely see him. He has all the money in the world, but we trade it all just to have dinner with him once a week without him checking his phone. He thinks providing means everything, Gemma added quietly. He doesn't understand that we just want him there. Present, that's all. Dominic glanced at her. You should tell him that. We've tried. Vivian's voice carried years of disappointment. He doesn't listen. Says we don't understand what it takes to maintain our lifestyle. Sounds lonely. It is, Gemma admitted. Money doesn't fix loneliness. It just makes it more comfortable. They drove in silence for a while after that, rain pounding the car, lightning occasionally illuminating the dark highway. 3 strangers sharing truths they rarely spoke aloud. Dominic thought about Rosie, about the custody hearing, about how he was fighting so hard to keep her, while these girls were fighting just to be seen by their father. Different problems, same ache underneath. You seem like a good dad, Vivian said eventually. The kind who stops in a storm, the kind who shows up. Dominic's throat tightened. I'm trying to be. That's more than most people do, Gemma said. He pulled into the hotel parking lot 20 minutes later. The rain had eased slightly, but the sky still churned with dark clouds. The twins gathered their things, expensive bags, clutched against their chests. Gemma turned to him before getting out. Her eyes were serious, searching his face as if trying to memorize it. Thank you, Dominic. Really. You didn't have to help us, but you did. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with something that sounded almost like prophecy. I hope the judge sees what we see, that you're exactly the kind of father your daughter needs. Me too, Dominic said quietly. They disappeared into the hotel lobby, swallowed by warm light and safety. Dominic sat in his car for a long moment, rain still pattering against his windshield. He had no idea that the two young women he'd just helped would change the course of his entire life. The drive home passed in a blur of wet roads and scattered thoughts. By the time Dominic pulled into his apartment complex, it was past midnight. The building loomed gray and tired paint peeling near the third-floor windows, a broken light flickering in the stairwell. Home. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. He climbed the stairs to his second-floor unit, each step heavy with exhaustion. When he opened the door, the familiar scent of home washed over him. Rosie's strawberry shampoo, the lavender candle Mrs. Delgado always lit when she babysat. Something that smelled faintly like the cookies they'd baked together last weekend. Rosie was asleep on the couch, a blanket pulled up to her chin. Her favorite stuffed elephant Peanut was tucked under her arm, its worn fabric testament to years of love. Miranda had given her that elephant the day she was born. It was the only thing of her mother's that Rosie had kept. Mrs. Delgado sat in the armchair, a magazine open on her lap. She looked up when Dominic entered, her weathered face softening with relief. She tried to wait up for you, the elderly woman whispered, but she couldn't make it. Thank you for watching her. Dominic pulled out the $20 bill he'd set aside, money he couldn't afford to spend, but had no choice about. Mrs. Delgado waved it away. Keep it. You need it more than I do. He tried to argue, but she was already gathering her things, that stubborn set to her jaw that he knew meant the conversation was over. She squeezed his arm on her way out, a silent gesture of support that meant more than she could know. After she left, Dominic knelt beside the couch, brushing Rosie's hair from her face. She stirred, eyes fluttering open. For a moment she looked confused, caught between dreams and waking. Then recognition flooded her features. Daddy. Hey, sweetheart, I'm home. I missed you, she mumbled, still half asleep. I missed you too, baby. He kissed her forehead. Go back to sleep. But she sat up instead, rubbing her eyes with small fists. The blanket fell away, revealing her favorite pajamas, the ones with little daisies that she insisted on wearing, even though they were getting too small. Daddy, are we going to be okay? The question gutted him. She was 6 years old. 6. She shouldn't have to worry about things like this. Shouldn't have to lie awake wondering if her world was about to fall apart. Shouldn't have learned the word custody before she learned to ride a bike. We're going to be fine, he said, pulling her into a hug. Mommy says I might have to live with her. Her voice was so small, so scared, that you can't take care of me. Dominic held her tighter, feeling his heart crack along fault lines he didn't know existed. Your mommy's wrong, Rosie. I can take care of you. I will take care of you. No matter what happens in that courtroom, I'm your dad, and I love you more than anything in this world. I don't want to leave you, she whispered into his shoulder. You won't. I promise. It was a promise he had no idea if he could keep, but as he held his daughter in their small, shabby apartment, rain still pounding against the windows, Dominic made a vow to himself. He would fight with everything he had, every breath, every dollar, every ounce of strength left in his body. She was worth all of it and more. The next 3 days passed like a fever dream. Dominic worked both jobs, saved every penny, and spent every free moment preparing for the hearing. He gathered character references from Rosie's teachers, from neighbors, from the parents of her classmates. He organized receipts showing he'd never missed a bill payment. He documented every school event he'd attended, every parent-teacher conference every Sunday morning at the park. Mr. Paulson, his public defender, had been honest with him from the start. "Miranda has resources we don't have," he'd said. "Her lawyer is one of the best in the city. We'll need to be smart about this." What Mr. Paulson had told him just last week still made Dominic's stomach turn. Miranda hadn't wanted Rosie 4 years ago. She'd made that crystal clear when she walked out, leaving behind a 2-year-old who cried for her mother every night for months. She disappeared completely, no calls, no visits, no birthday cards. But 6 months ago, Miranda's grandmother had passed away, leaving behind a substantial trust fund. A trust fund that would only be released to Miranda if she could prove she was a responsible parent providing a stable home for a child. $2 million. That's what Rosie was worth to her mother. Not love, not guilt, not a sudden maternal awakening. Money. The knowledge had made Dominic sick, but it also made him more determined than ever to fight. The courthouse smelled like old wood and anxiety. Dominic sat at the defendant's table, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Mr. Paulson shuffled through papers beside him, occasionally muttering to himself. The man was doing his best. Dominic could see that, but he could also see the doubt in his lawyer's eyes. They both knew this wasn't going to be easy. Across the aisle, Miranda sat perfectly composed. Her navy dress looked expensive, pressed and pristine. Her hair fell in careful waves around her shoulders. She looked like a magazine advertisement for the perfect mother. She hadn't looked at Dominic once since they'd entered the courtroom. Her lawyer, Bradley Kincaid, radiated confidence. His suit probably cost more than Dominic's car. He held his pen like a weapon, already planning his attack. "All rise," the bailiff announced. "The Honorable Judge Harrison Ashford presiding." Dominic stood on legs that felt like they might give out. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. He watched the door behind the bench, waiting for the judge, who would decide if he was worthy of being called a father. The door opened, and Dominic's heart nearly stopped. Judge Harrison Ashford walked in tall and distinguished, late 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes that swept across the courtroom like searchlights. Everything about him projected authority, power, control. Dominic recognized him instantly, not from seeing him before, but from the resemblance. Those eyes, that strong jawline, the way he carried himself. He'd seen those features just 3 nights ago, in the rain, on the faces of 2 young women stranded on the highway, Gemma and Vivian. This was their father. This couldn't be happening. The judge took his seat, adjusting his glasses as he opened the case file. His eyes scanned the first page, and Dominic saw it. The slightest pause, a flicker of something crossing those sharp features. The judge's gaze lifted, landing directly on Dominic. Recognition passed between them, silent, electric. A moment that lasted less than a second but felt like an eternity. "Good morning," Judge Ashford said, his voice steady and authoritative. "We're here today for the custody hearing of Rosie Marie Reeves. Counselors, are both parties ready to proceed?" "Yes, Your Honor," Kincaid said smoothly. "Ready, Your Honor." Mr. Paulson added, his voice notably less confident. Kincaid stood immediately, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to submit additional evidence. Documents proving that Mr. Reeves has been late on rent payments 3 times this year. Bank statements showing his account has dropped below $100 on multiple occasions. And testimony from his employer confirming he has requested schedule changes that suggest an inability to maintain stable employment." He slid a folder across to the judge's bench. "Mrs. Reeves, on the other hand, has secured a 3-bedroom home in an excellent school district, has stable employment, and has completed parenting classes in preparation for this transition. Dominic felt the blood drain from his face. Everything Kincaid said was technically true. The rent had been late because he'd prioritized Rosie's medical bills when she'd had pneumonia last winter. The bank account had dropped because he'd paid for her school supplies and new shoes when she'd outgrown her old ones. The schedule changes were so he could attend her school events. But stripped of context, it sounded damning. Mr. Paulson scribbled notes frantically, but Dominic could see the worry in his eyes. This was it. He was going to lose her. The judge studied the documents, his expression unreadable. Dominic's chest tightened. Each second felt like an hour. He could hear his own heartbeat loud and desperate in his ears. Then Judge Ashford looked up and something flickered in his eyes. "Before we begin," he said slowly, "I'd like to call a brief recess, 15 minutes. We'll reconvene shortly." The bailiff looked confused but nodded. "All rise." Everyone stood as the judge exited through the back door. Miranda's lawyer leaned over to whisper something to her, clearly as confused as everyone else. Mr. Paulson turned to Dominic, eyebrows raised. "That's unusual. Did something happen?" Dominic couldn't speak. His mind was racing, trying to process what this meant. The judge was their father, the father of the twin girls he'd helped 3 nights ago. And now that man held Rosie's future in his hands. 10 minutes crawled by like hours. Then the bailiff approached Dominic's table. "Mr. Reeves, the judge would like to see you in his chambers." Miranda's head snapped up. "Excuse me. On what grounds?" "Just Mr. Reeves," the bailiff repeated firmly. Kincaid stood his face, flushing with indignation. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We object to any private conversation between the judge and the defendant." "The judge didn't ask for your opinion, counselor," the bailiff said. "Mr. Reeves, please follow me." Dominic's legs felt like jelly as he rose. Mr. Paulson grabbed his arm, his voice low and urgent. "Whatever he asks you, be honest. Don't try to be clever, just honest." Dominic nodded and followed the bailiff through a side door down a narrow hallway, lined with portraits of stern-faced judges, and into a wood-paneled office. Judge Ashford stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the city below. He didn't turn when Dominic entered. "Sit down, Mr. Reeves." Dominic lowered himself into one of the leather chairs facing the desk. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the judge turned. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held something that looked almost like respect. "3 nights ago," he began, "my daughters called me from a hotel. They'd been stranded on Highway 89 in a terrible storm. Their car had broken down, and they'd been there for over an hour. In the rain, scared, alone." He moved to his desk, sitting down across from Dominic. "No one stopped. No one helped." His voice tightened almost imperceptibly. "Until you did." Dominic's mouth was dry. "I didn't know who they were, Your Honor." "I know you didn't. That's exactly my point." The judge leaned back in his chair, studying Dominic with an intensity that made him want to look away. "They told me about you, about your kindness, about how you had every reason to keep driving. You were exhausted. You had your own problems, significant ones. But you stopped anyway." He paused. "They told me about your daughter, about this custody battle." "Your Honor, I swear I didn't plan." Judge Ashford held up a hand. "I know you didn't plan this. I know this is pure coincidence. But here's my dilemma, Mr. Reeves. I know who you are now. I know you helped my daughters when no one else would. And that creates a conflict." Dominic's stomach dropped. "You're going to recuse yourself." "No." Dominic's head snapped up. "I'm not," the judge continued, "because I looked into your case last night. I couldn't sleep after Gemma and Vivian told me about you. So I read your file. Every page, every document, every accusation your ex-wife has made against you." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. Your ex-wife claims you're financially unstable, that you work too much, that you can't provide a proper home for Rosie. But here's what I found interesting. She's provided no evidence of neglect, no evidence of abuse, no evidence that Rosie is anything other than loved and cared for. His voice hardened. What she has provided is a lot of opinions about what a father should be able to afford. Dominic didn't dare breathe. I also made some calls, Judge Ashford continued, off the record, to Rosie's school, to your neighbors, to the parents of her classmates. He paused. Do you know what they told me? Dominic shook his head, not trusting his voice. They told me you never miss a parent-teacher conference, that you volunteer for field trips even when you're working double shifts, that Rosie talks about you constantly, about the bedtime stories you make up for her, about the park you take her to every Sunday, about how you teach her to be kind. The judge's voice softened. They told me she's a happy child who loves her father. Tears burned behind Dominic's eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Not here. Not yet. I also had someone look more thoroughly into your ex-wife's background, the judge said. Something her lawyer was very careful to avoid mentioning. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. Would you like to know what they found? Dominic stared at the folder. Miranda Reeves has been arrested twice in the past year for possession of controlled substances, cocaine. Both charges were dropped due to technicalities, but the arrests are on record. The words hit Dominic like physical blows. She's also been terminated from her employment 3 months ago for showing up intoxicated. And I know about the trust fund, Mr. Reeves. I know she's only pursuing custody because of her grandmother's will. Judge Ashford opened the folder, revealing pages of documentation, police reports, drug test results, employment records, a copy of the trust fund stipulations. This is a full investigation report, everything her lawyer tried to hide. Dominic stared at the evidence, his mind reeling. Miranda had hidden all of this, had stood there in her expensive dress and perfect hair, painting herself as the responsible parent while hiding a history of substance abuse and lies. Why are you telling me this? He asked, his voice breaking. You could recuse yourself. Let another judge handle it. No one would question it. I could, Judge Ashford agreed. But I won't. He stood walking around the desk to stand before Dominic. Because 3 nights ago, you showed me something about character that I can't ignore. You helped 2 strangers when you had every reason not to. You showed kindness when you were exhausted. You stopped when everyone else kept driving. His voice carried a weight that went beyond the courtroom. That's the kind of man I want raising a child. Not because you help my daughters, but because helping strangers when you can barely help yourself shows who you really are. Dominic couldn't hold it back anymore. Tears spilled down his cheeks, silent and unstoppable. My daughters asked me to tell you something, the judge said. They said to tell you that Rosie is lucky, that she has the kind of father they wish they'd had growing up. His voice grew thick with emotion. They were right. I wasn't there for them the way I should have been. I chose work over presence. I chose success over showing up. But you show up for your daughter every single day. That's what matters. He walked toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. Let's go finish this. Dominic walked back into the courtroom in a daze. The gallery felt different now, smaller somehow, less threatening. He took his seat beside Mr. Paulson, who looked at him with barely concealed curiosity. Miranda's eyes were sharp, suspicious. Kincaid sat rigid, clearly unhappy about being left out of whatever had transpired. But Dominic didn't care anymore. For the first time in months, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. All rise, the bailiff called. Judge Ashford took his seat, his expression completely professional. He picked up the folder Dominic had just seen in his chambers. Before we hear opening statements, the judge began, The court has received new information relevant to this case, information that was not disclosed by the petitioner's counsel. Kincaid stood immediately, his face flushing. Your Honor, what information? We weren't notified of any. Sit down, Mr. Kincaid. The judge's voice was steel. You weren't notified because your client deliberately concealed it. Miranda's face went pale. Her perfect composure cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. Mrs. Reeves, Judge Ashford said, looking directly at her, you've presented yourself to this court as a stable, responsible parent, seeking to protect your daughter from an unfit father. But you failed to mention your 2 arrests for drug possession. You failed to mention being terminated from your employment. You failed to mention that you're currently under investigation for substance abuse. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. And you failed to mention, the judge continued, his voice cutting through the noise, that you're only pursuing custody because of a $2 million trust fund that requires you to demonstrate parental responsibility. Miranda's face crumbled. Kincaid was on his feet, objecting, his face red with outrage. Your Honor, these charges were dropped. This is slander. The charges were dropped on technicalities, Judge Ashford said calmly. The arrests are still on record. The drug tests are still positive. The witness statements are still documented. He held up the folder. This is a full investigation completed by social services. It's all here. Every test, every statement, every piece of evidence your client tried to hide. Miranda's lawyer fell silent. There was nothing left to say. The judge looked at Dominic. For just a moment, something passed between them. Gratitude, recognition, understanding. This court, Judge Ashford announced, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent room, awards full custody of Rosie Marie Reeves to her father, Dominic Reeves. Mrs. Reeves will be allowed supervised visitation pending completion of a rehabilitation program. He paused, letting the words settle like stones in still water. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down, and Dominic Reeves's world changed forever. For a long moment, he couldn't move. He sat frozen at the table, the judge's words echoing in his mind like a prayer answered, like a door slamming shut on every nightmare that had kept him awake for months. It was over. He had won. Mr. Paulson was shaking his hand, saying something about this being unprecedented, about what an unexpected turn this had taken. But Dominic barely heard him. He was watching Miranda across the aisle, watching her crumble as Kincaid whispered urgently in her ear. She'd lied. She'd tried to take Rosie away from him with lies, and it had almost worked. Mr. Reeves, the bailiff approached. You're free to go. Dominic stood on shaky legs. He looked up at the bench, but Judge Ashford was already gone, disappeared through the back door into his chambers. There was so much Dominic wanted to say, so much gratitude burning in his chest. But the moment had passed. He walked out of the courthouse into brilliant sunshine. The storm from 3 nights ago felt like a lifetime away. The air tasted cleaner somehow. The sunlight seemed warmer on his skin. Colors he hadn't noticed in months suddenly demanded attention. The blue of the sky, the green of the trees lining the courthouse steps, the yellow of a taxi passing by. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Delgado. How did it go? She asked the moment he answered, her voice tight with worry. I won. Saying it out loud made it real. I won, Mrs. Delgado. Rosie's staying with me. He could hear her crying on the other end of the line. Happy tears, relieved tears, the kind of tears that come when prayers are answered. Oh, thank God, Dominic. Rosie's been so worried. She keeps asking if you are coming back. Tell her I'm coming home right now. Tell her we're going to celebrate. He practically ran to his car, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. The drive home blurred together, streets and traffic lights and turns he made on autopilot. All he could think about was Rosie. When he burst through the apartment door, she was sitting on the floor with her coloring books, Peanut propped up beside her like a loyal companion. She looked up, eyes wide and frightened, searching his face for answers. "Daddy!" Dominic dropped to his knees, opening his arms. She ran to him. He caught her holding her so tightly he thought he might never let go. "You're staying with me," he whispered into her hair. "Forever. You're staying with me forever, baby." Rosie pulled back, looking up at him with those big brown eyes. Eyes that had seen too much worry for a 6-year-old. Eyes that were just beginning to understand that everything was going to be okay. "Really, I don't have to go, really. You're mine, and nothing's going to change that." She threw her arms around his neck, her small body shaking with sobs of relief. Dominic cried too, right there on the floor of their tiny apartment, holding the only thing in the world that mattered. Mrs. Delgado watched from the doorway, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I'll give you two some time," she said softly and slipped away. For a long while, father and daughter just held each other. Eventually, Rosie pulled back and wiped her nose on her sleeve. "Can we have ice cream?" Dominic laughed. A real genuine laugh that felt like it came from somewhere deep inside him that had been locked away for months. "We can have all the ice cream you want." They went to the small ice cream shop 2 blocks away, the one with the red awning and the owner who always gave Rosie extra rainbow sprinkles. She got chocolate with sprinkles and gummy bears, her favorite impossible combination. Dominic got vanilla, and they sat at the little table by the window, watching people walk by. The world looked different now, brighter, fuller of possibility. "Daddy," Rosie said, licking her spoon. What made the judge change his mind? Dominic thought about that stormy night, about 2 young women standing in the rain, about the choice to stop when he could have kept driving. "I helped some people," he said, "when they needed it. And, and, I guess sometimes kindness comes back to you in ways you don't expect." Rosie considered this with the seriousness only a 6-year-old could muster. "Like when you do something nice and then something nice happens to you?" "Exactly like that, sweetheart." She nodded, satisfied with this explanation, and returned to her ice cream with renewed enthusiasm. They finished their treats, and as they walked home hand in hand, Dominic's phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, Mr. Reeves, this is Harrison Ashford." Dominic stopped walking. "Your Honor, I don't know how to thank you. What you did today." "I did what was right," the judge interrupted gently. "That's all. But I'm calling because my daughters would like to see you again, to properly thank you for what you did that night." There was a pause. "We'd like to invite you and Rosie to dinner this Saturday, if you're available." Dominic looked down at Rosie, who was watching him curiously, her small hand still clasped in his. "We'd be honored," he said. "Good. Gemma will text you the address. 7 o'clock. And Mr. Reeves, yes, bring your appetite. My daughters have been planning the menu for 2 days." Saturday arrived faster than expected. Dominic borrowed a tie from his neighbor and made sure Rosie wore her favorite dress, the yellow one with sunflowers that she insisted made her look like a princess. They drove to an address in the hills where houses had gates and driveways that could fit 10 of Dominic's cars. The Ashford home rose before them, elegant but somehow welcoming, with warm lights glowing in every window. Gemma and Vivian answered the door together, both grinning. "You came," Gemma pulled him into a hug before he could protest. "Of course we came." Vivian knelt down to Rosie's level. "You must be Rosie. Your dad told us so much about you." Rosie hid behind Dominic's legs, suddenly shy. But Vivian just smiled and held out her hand. "Want to see our game room? We have almost every video game ever made." "Well, almost." Rosie looked up at Dominic for permission. He nodded, and she tentatively took Vivian's hand. They disappeared into the house, leaving Gemma and Dominic in the foyer. "She's beautiful," Gemma said. "Looks just like you. Thank you for this, for all of it. If you and Vivian hadn't told your father, you would have figured it out anyway." Gemma interrupted. People like you always do. You fight for what matters. Judge Ashford appeared at the top of the stairs. Without his robes, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, he looked different, softer, more like a regular father, and less like the man who controlled courtrooms with a single word. Dominic, he came down to shake his hand. Welcome to our home. Dinner was everything the judge had promised and more. The table overflowed with food more than they could possibly eat. Conversation flowed easily, laughter filling the spaces between words. Rosie came out of her shell, especially when Vivian taught her how to play a racing video game and let her win. Gemma told embarrassing stories about their father, and the judge took it all with good-natured groans and theatrical sighs. Dominic sat back and watched, marveling at how quickly things could change. A week ago, he'd been preparing to lose everything. Now he was sitting at this table, surrounded by warmth and welcome, watching his daughter laugh with people who had been strangers days before. After dinner, while the girls taught Rosie a card game, Judge Ashford led Dominic out to the back patio. The city sprawled below them, lights twinkling against the darkness. The same storm that had brought them together had cleared into a perfect night. My daughters told me something the other day, the judge said, staring out at the view. They said I was never there when they were growing up, that I chose work over them. He was quiet for a moment. They were right. Dominic didn't know what to say, so he said nothing, letting the silence hold space for the judge's confession. I told myself I was providing for them, that working hard, building my career, giving them every material advantage, that was how I showed love. He shook his head slowly. I was wrong. I gave them everything except the one thing they actually wanted. Me. You're here now, Dominic offered. The judge turned to face him. Because of you. Seeing what you were willing to sacrifice for Rosie, how you fought for her, even when everything was stacked against you. It made me realize what I'd been missing, what I'd lost by always putting work first. He looked back at the city lights. I can't get back the time I lost with them, but I can do better moving forward, and I wanted to thank you for that reminder. Dominic considered this. I think we were both supposed to meet that night. You needed to see what being present means, and I needed to remember that good things can still happen, that the world isn't always against me. Judge Ashford smiled. My daughters have asked if you and Rosie would like to come back next week, and the week after that. I think they're hoping to make this a regular thing. We'd like that, Dominic said. We'd like that a lot. They stood there in comfortable silence, two fathers who'd found something unexpected in each other. Respect, understanding, the beginning of something that might be called friendship. Inside, they could hear the girls laughing. Rosie's high-pitched giggle mixed with Gemma and Vivian's voices, creating a sound that felt remarkably like family. 3 months later, the apartment was the same, small, modest. Paint still peeling near the windows, floorboards still creaking in all the familiar places. But Dominic was not the same man who had lived here 3 months ago. Rosie was asleep in her room, Peanut tucked under her arm as always. Dominic sat on the couch, scrolling through photos on his phone. Pictures from the past 3 months. Rosie and the twins at the zoo, all three of them making silly faces at the camera. The four of them at a baseball game, Rosie wearing a foam finger, almost as big as she was. Judge Ashford teaching Rosie how to ride a bike, his face lit up with a joy that seemed to have been absent for years. His life hadn't gotten easier exactly. He still worked 2 jobs. The bills still piled up on the kitchen counter, demanding attention he couldn't always give. But none of that mattered anymore, because Rosie was with him, safe and loved and happy. And he'd gained something he never expected, a family, not by blood but by choice, by kindness, by one decision to stop in a storm when he could have kept driving. His phone buzzed, a text from Gemma. Movie night Saturday. Vivian's picking, so prepare for something weird. Dominic smiled and typed back, We'll be there. He set his phone down and walked to Rosie's room. She was curled up with Peanut, breathing softly, her face peaceful in the gentle glow of her nightlight. He kissed her forehead. "I love you, sweetheart." She stirred slightly, her voice thick with sleep. "Love you too, Daddy." He watched her for a moment longer, then walked to the window and looked out at the clear night sky. Somewhere out there was Highway 89, the stretch of road where two strangers had stood in the rain waiting for someone to stop. He had almost driven past them. One decision. That's all it took. One moment of choosing kindness over convenience, compassion over self-preservation. Dominic smiled and turned away from the window. He would never drive past someone who needed help again. Saturday came as it always did now. Dominic, Rosie, Gemma, Vivian, and Judge Harrison Ashford sat together in the Ashford living room. Popcorn bowls passed between them, blankets shared, a movie playing on the large screen, something Vivian had chosen that was indeed wonderfully weird. Rosie sat between Gemma and Vivian, all three of them giggling at something on screen. She called them her big sisters, now a title they had accepted with surprised delight. Judge Ashford handed Dominic a drink and settled into the seat beside him. "Thank you," the judge said quietly. "For what?" "For reminding me what matters." Dominic looked at Rosie, at the twins, at this unlikely family that had formed from a stormy night and an act of unexpected kindness. "Family," he said. "Family," the judge agreed. Rosie turned around, waving impatiently. "Daddy, Mr. Harrison, you're missing the good part." Both men smiled. They stood and walked toward the sound of laughter. Before the movie resumed, Rosie looked up at everyone with the serious expression she wore when she had something important to say. "I have a question." "What is it, sweetheart?" Dominic asked. "What's family?" The room fell quiet. Gemma and Vivian exchanged glances. Judge Ashford cleared his throat. Rosie scrunched up her face, thinking hard. Then her expression cleared. "Family is like when it's raining really hard and you're scared and someone stops their car to help you." She looked at Dominic. "Like what Daddy did." She turned to Judge Ashford. "And then those people become your family because they chose to stay, even when they didn't have to." She looked around at each of them with those big brown eyes. "We're like that." "Right. We're family now." Gemma wiped her eyes. Vivian pulled Rosie into a hug. Judge Ashford looked at the ceiling, blinking rapidly. Dominic knelt down and wrapped his arms around his daughter. "Yes, sweetheart, we're family." Later that night, as they drove home through quiet streets, Rosie fell asleep in the back seat. Dominic took a different route than usual. He didn't plan it consciously. His hands just turned the wheel, guiding them toward Highway 89. He pulled over at the same spot where he'd found Gemma and Vivian 3 months ago. The road was empty now. No storm, no stranded cars, just moonlight washing over asphalt. He sat there for a long moment, engine idling, looking at the stretch of highway that had changed his life. If he had kept driving that night, but he hadn't. He had stopped, and that had made all the difference. Dominic looked in the rearview mirror at Rosie, peacefully asleep with Peanut clutched to her chest. Then he put the car in drive and headed home. Home, to the small apartment that held everything that mattered. Home, to the life he had almost lost and fought so hard to keep. Home, to the family he had found in the most unexpected way. And in that moment, driving through the quiet night with his daughter, safe in the back seat, Dominic Reeves understood something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Home isn't a place. Home is the people who choose to stay, and he had finally found his.